Now, Susan, I mean, you are the senior diplomat, both of you, now look at the bigger picture about Sino-US relations and its impact to the world. I know, Susan, you used to suggest a co-evolution, you had many good ideas. So how can we really, I mean, given 2023, we are having another 2024 election year coming up, but given 2023, with the both new government, U.S. Congress and new State Council of China, and a new Politburo. So what can we really do? I mean, on both sides, to put a floor as our dialogue theme, and building a floor for the China-U.S. relations scenarios and recommendations. And so how can we do that? I mean, we'd like to hear both of you senior diplomat and years of experience of Sino-US relations. So give us some advice on how we can really better have a floor. I mean, we need a floor. We can't just let a free falling of this relation. I mean, as the two largest economy in the world, we have a moral responsibility, not only for the US and China, but for the world. So both of you have a lot of experience in that. I'd like to hear from you. Maybe Susan can start.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the thing that we have always tried to do in US-China relations, really since the beginning, since normalization, is have areas that we have as a project together, something that we're working on, some areas of cooperation, because there have always been these areas of difference and tension. We've always had some areas where basically we figure we're really not going to agree anytime soon. So we talk about those and we realize that we have to manage those. But then we also have areas where, we have a lot going on in the relationship where we have to talk to each other about solving concrete specific problems. We negotiate, in the case of course, the WTO accession, and then all of the other agreements around trade and investment. Specific, we had a BIT negotiation, a bilateral investment treaty negotiation going for about 10 years. So we have areas like that where we're talking constantly about managing problems, but it's about things we're doing together. And then we have areas where we're trying to sort of actually work together to cooperate, to make progress in some areas. So that's been the approach. Now I think that has sort of fallen out of favor for the last 5 years in the US government. There was a lot of feeling of impatience, that some of the negotiations weren't bearing enough fruit, that, we were being taken advantage of, et cetera. But I think this still the way forward, even in this very difficult environment where there's all this mutual suspicion and where really the two sides kind of have now see each other as a threat, which I think is over exaggerated on both parts, but that is kind of where we're at. I think we're really going to need to come up with some way of balancing all of that negative aspect in the relationship now with something positive. And I mean, people have mentioned various areas in where the US and China could cooperate. And I think I subscribe to all of them. But, the thing that really worries me, and the area where I hope we will actually start to focus some energy, is on the international system. All these international institutions that we've built over the last 70 years, and which both the US and China have benefited from immensely, they are now under fire. And, from the WHO, the World Health Organization, that didn't perform well during the pandemic, to the World Trade Organization, which is, not seen as serving to level the playing field in the global economy, or at least by some countries, and the dispute resolution mechanism doesn't function anymore. We've got problems owing in part to Russia's war in Ukraine in the areas of food security for developing countries, energy security for many countries. We've got problems in the global economy. And, the obvious area for the US and China to cooperate as the two largest economies in the world are in all these macroeconomic development, sustainable development goals in the UN, macro financial stability, and all kinds of other areas where the international financial institutions have their mandates. So I think there's plenty of work to be done, and some of this work can only be done with the US and China involved, maybe together with others, but certainly at least the two of them involved and pulling in the same direction. So whether we call that cooperation or not, I don't know, but this is what is going to need to happen. And believe me, these institutions that have been set up over the last 70 years, if we don't tend to them, they're not going to be there, and we're really going to miss them when they're gone. It's very easy to destroy things, but it's not so easy to build up these kinds of institutions and habits of sort of working together in the international system. And I think we really do not want to see the G0 so-called world that Ian Bremmer talks about, the sort of more chaotic, anarchic system. The global system has worked. It's not perfect, obviously. It could be a lot better, and we should work on that. But I think it has really served, a lot of purposes, and we're going to need it again for the next pandemic. We need it to try to work on climate change together in an orderly way among, the community of nations involved in that, including very much China and the US. And so I think this is the area that I see that needs work, and that I worry that this sort of superpower competition between the US and China is really going to cause us to be distracted from that, what I view as sort of much more foundational work in the global system, and for our own two countries' interests, more foundational.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that you mentioned about this of course China-US relation that has a huge stake in this global system. I mean, China benefit enormously from this Bretton Woods system that US led, in the last 75 years, and organizations like WTO, WHO, World Bank, and IMF are critical. I mean, even now AIB is playing some active role. So you're right. I think we are facing the pandemic, and how we can really prevent the next catastrophe. And also we are having this infrastructure needs that recognized by all the countries. China now probably build the best infrastructure now, but the US is also putting a lot of investment, and B3W and the BRI can really work together, basically, and the EU Global Gateway. So this year we're having, actually China going to have a third section of the Belt and Road Summit. I remember the first summit, the US representative has come. The second summit, US embassy people attended. I mean, this time probably China still welcome US to attend. And let's talk about how we can work infrastructure-wise. Maybe AIB can work with World Bank and ADB and AFDB, and let's tackle some joint project. Would be great. I agree with you that multilateral system that led us so far, that avoided the Third World War, is so important. And then we couldn't have a ground zero. We need a G2, G3, and all those great help. So I think that's very, very important. We urgently need both US and China to work together. So Doug, what's your assessment of the Sino-US relation in terms of international cooperation? And well, of course, we're going to talk about Taiwan later, but let's have an overview of the US-China relations.
Well, we've come a long way from the dark days of the Trump administration, where we were walking away from international cooperation at every opportunity. And this should be seen as much by China as by the United States as a chance to put on a more constructive agenda. Susan mentioned the WTO. The breakdown of the WTO is a great source of distress for me. One of the problems with the WTO is it has, consensual rulemaking, and so efforts to modernize the WTO failed in the Doha round because there are a few outlying states. But that doesn't mean it's not susceptible to leadership. And if the leading trading states can come together, and that would be the EU, Japan, China, and the US, at least at the core. If they can come together with some proposals for getting the WTO to perform better, the rest of the world will be brought in, they'll be sucked in by the need to get on the same trading principles and rules that the major trading partners have agreed to. I think if China would invite or encourage cooperation among those four major parties to take a new look at the trade agenda, I think there'll be a lot of support for it, maybe more than in the US initially, because the US has grown sour on the WTO. WHO, we've already mentioned. There's a great scope for reinvigorating international cooperation. I wish that in the current atmosphere following the terrible events of the earthquakes in Turkey, we could find a way to cooperate bilaterally or multilaterally. I know China has already promised a lot of assistance, and it's a difficult challenge to provide assistance in those circumstances. But this would be a place where you could get the spirit expressed, if not the material results, immediately accomplished, to show that there's a common desire to rescue the people who are suffering in northern Syria and southern Turkey. And beyond that, we've got one global issue after another. The African recurrent epidemics are not going to go away. Operation on the second Ebola breakout between the US and China. And there ought to be institutions put in place to make that a more regular occurrence as these threats to human health emerge around the world, especially in Africa. We don't have our future at stake, nor does China have its future at stake. We can do something to demonstrate common purpose and common capability.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. I think that there's cooperation. At least we need to show the spirit, sympathy, for example, also the support for example, disaster like earthquake in Turkey and Syria. That exactly. I mean, all of us, particularly those US, China, and EU countries, Japan, can work together. I believe China actually is set on those global trading system, multilateral system, like China has applied to jump CPTPP that is designed by the US. We hope US can come back, and China is also applying to jump DIPA, a digital partnership agreement that issued by New Zealand and Singapore. And I hope that US can come to that as well. So we could have more platform to talk about. I even think about APEC. If it's economy related, why not China is excluded from this in this part of the, as the largest economy of this part of the world. So there's many platforms we could resume the dialogue or start a new dialogue on infrastructure and many things. So absolutely, those are areas that I think US and China probably should focus, and also on climate change and also on the global economic status. That's a lot of work that our both countries can do. Now, I think the reason that China US has been really now in a difficult time, but I don't think we probably can get back to the Cold War, because we see there's I was talking to Vitaly just a few weeks ago. He was saying there's a trade war, there's a tech war, there's a cultural war, whatever. He listed 6 wars that may be going on, but I think we need to avoid that. We're not in the Soviet Union era where we're not so much intertwined. And before pandemic, we have 5 million people travel between US and China. And currently we have 300,000 Chinese students studying in the US. We need more US students coming to China. But what I think is that, that we have to strengthen our focus more broadly on the global issues. And US, China are enormously benefiting from this business relation. I just read the news data issued by US government that last year they had another record of trade figures between US and China reached $690 billion. I mean, a historical high. Again, even though we're having all those agonizing relations, but our trade activity is still going on, and there's more. Many. There was, according to 2 years of statistics, 70,000 US company in China generated $700 billion revenues in China. So that's an enormous, and also China benefit enormously. So what I think is that what really put us into this is that I mean we try to avoid this. Graham Madison said Thucydides trap, and the same Harvard professor Joseph Knight told me maybe we're now in this kind of a adjustment period. You know, we'll take time, maybe 10, 15, 20, 35. We'll get to accept each other. Maybe China have a different structure, different system, but let's coexisting peacefully. But one of the most daunting challenges, this issue of Taiwan. Now let's get to the core issue. I know that Dr. has you served as a representative, a non-official representative of U.S. in Taiwan for many years. So this Taiwan thing, we see some recent changes, particularly since last Nancy Pelosi visit, speaker that calls attention. But now we see some changes. The KMT just swept the midterm election, and yesterday the vice chairman of KMT, Andrew Shah, is visiting Beijing. So we hope that this cross-strait relations. I mean, before the DPP, we had when KMT was ruling, there's millions of mainlanders flooded Taiwan. There's a student exchanges. There's 300 or 400 mainland husband wives formed a family existing in Taiwan, and there's 1 or 2 million Taiwanese working in China. So I hope that this kind of integration, economic activities could eventually promote a peaceful reunification, rather than we are having these tensions that escalating. Seems to be between U.S. and China on Taiwan. So probably that, maybe I start with you on this very important, the core issue of bilateral relations.
Well, I think it's always important to think of Taipei, Washington, and Beijing as kind of a triangle. And when one moves, it affects the others. They're kind of rigidly bound together. And a lot of the motion from on the Taiwan, U.S.-China triangle has come from the U.S. in the latter years of the Biden administration, latter years of the Trump administration and the early years of the Biden administration. The background music has been mostly military and unpleasant or threatening, coming from China. The events in Hong Kong have soured many people's mouths in Taiwan about the prospect for peaceful reunification. They would be asked to sacrifice too much by looking at what's happened to Hong Kong in the aftermath of the one country, two systems implementation. And so they're looking for something else as a formula for long-term management of cross-strait relations. We're now in an election year in Taiwan. As you noted, the KMT did well in the local elections, where they traditionally do fairly well. How well they'll do in island-wide elections is very unclear. Who the candidate will be is very unclear. You mentioned Andrew Xia, a former Mainland Affairs Commission chairman from the Ma Ying-jeou period, is now visiting the mainland. I think that's a good thing. I'm glad China's giving him a positive welcome. But you have to be careful. You don't want this to be a partisan welcome. I think this would be a great time for China to begin to relax some of the strictures it put in place on cross-strait relations after the election of Tsai Ing-wen back in 2016. It's time to move to a more constructive relationship. I could see where messages could be exchanged as they previously had been done between bodies on the mainland and Taiwan side, without respect to which party is involved, to deal with practical, pragmatic concerns. Transportation goes on, but there's reason for officials or semi-official bodies to communicate with each other about facilitating that kind of travel back and forth to resolve problems that arise. There are lots of human relations problems. As you mentioned, there's a lot of people intermarried across the strait. There's a role for the respective authorities to communicate about the well-being of these people, make sure that what human needs they face can be addressed, where the other side needs to have its role in the outcomes. So this is an area where I think, if I were to advise Taiwan, the mainland authorities about Taiwan, it would be to show a little bit of relaxation and tolerance to what's taking place. Try not to make yourself the centerpiece of every political debate that takes place on the island in an election year. Let them discuss among themselves what they want to do, and not always contrast with how you can be more and more anti-mainland. And the mainland has a big role to play in sending the message that says, we don't want to be the big issue in your election. We want you to work things out, and we will deal with whomever wins in a way to try to persuade you that in the long-term peaceful unification is in your interest, and not force the issue before the people are ready for it.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. I think you're right. For both across the street. I mean, now we are post the pandemic, and I hope those three major links or small major three major links can really resume as soon as possible. The flights, the people exchanges, even let's have a tourist starting again of across the street. So this is really a good sign. I mean, there's Andrew Shah, vice chairman of KMT, visiting China, visited Beijing mainland is very important. And now we have seen the deterioration of China-U.S. relations. Out of this, many mechanisms of the communication has been suspended because of Nancy Pelosi's visit last year, and now we have a new Speaker of the House, Republican. I mean, Kevin, also McCarthy. So, Susan, you've been working in the government for a long time, and then U.S. government have a different functions: Congress, administration, and the legislation, jurisdiction, of course. So, what if Kevin McCarthy coming again? And also historically Gingrich came before. So what? How can we really calm things down? And I remember when Gingrich came, he not only visited Taiwan, but he visited mainland, visited many other countries, and also Vice President Gore came to China to explain things. So how can we make a really smooth cross straight and sign a U.S. bilateral relation, rather than we are facing another crisis coming up, and then maybe jeopardize further U.S. senior officials visit. And we after a while we got to have this new momentum of visiting each other. Guidelines set up by President Biden, President Xi. We don't have to be jeopardized on that. So what's your analysis of the situation that in terms of the Speaker's visit, possible visit?
Yeah, I mean, I think Doug's worked in Congress as well, so we should let him come in here too. But it's very important for people to understand, and this is difficult, I know, because it sounds kind of like an excuse, but that the legislature and the executive in the U.S. really are, co-equal and separate branches. So it's very hard. I mean, if the executive branch tries to stop Congress from doing something, Congress almost on purpose then does it twice as hard because they feel like they don't have to answer to the executive. So it's a very, our system stresses checks and balances. It's one of the things maybe that makes decision-making in the U.S. system take longer, et cetera. But it is a check on kind of the power of the different branches in government. And so it is very real that the executive can't stop the Congress from doing some of these things. I do think it's important for the Congress to know more and more deeply about the U.S.-China relationship, about the relationship and the policy toward Taiwan. I remember when I worked in Chengdu and in Beijing, I took congressional delegations always around China. I took a big Senate delegation to Dunhuang, and then to Kashgar and to Urumqi. So, I mean, we've had big congressional visits to China, but I think it's really fallen off in the recent period. And I think that should be remedied going forward if possible. But right now, there's also a very difficult domestic partisan political situation in the U.S. And so this is also an opposition member of the Congress, Kevin McCarthy, wishing to take a trip to Taiwan. And it'll be very hard in this current environment to keep that from happening if he really wants to go, and if he has the wherewithal to go, which it seems he probably will. My personal thinking on this is that it won't be good for the mainland to overreact to a Kevin McCarthy visit in a year that is an election year on the island. So what I think could be a better strategy is to try to make some, positive, big story, either, with outreach to Taiwan, or some positive gesture to Taiwan, or some positive thing in US-China relations. But I think the mainland does have a lot of agency here. I see that there's a tendency to sort of just react to things the US does. Now we see this visit coming down the pike, and what I think should happen is that we should make an effort to have a big positive story, at whatever, to counteract whatever the perceived negative impact would be of a McCarthy visit in Beijing. So I think that there is a possibility for the mainland to have this agency and to take action and to try to do something to not have this become a crisis. I don't think either the US or China wants to see a crisis right now, or a conflict in our relationship. We're both working hard on domestic challenges, and we have a lot of issues. I know President Xi made a speech recently at the Zhongyang Dangxiao, the party school, about China's modernization. Biden's State of the Union address was kind of about American modernization. So these are the things we want to be working on. We don't want to have a crisis in US-China relations that takes us away from all of that. So I hope that we could to get beyond this Kevin McCarthy visit if it happens.
Yeah, right. I think we need to both working on our domestic issue. Like I was talking to Richard Haas and Ridalio just recently. Both emphasize, we have to really put our own house in order, and really we are facing a lot of domestic challenges. And one of the things is that regarding the Kevin McCarthy visit, now since he's from Republican, and now the executive branch and administration could maybe really say that, okay, they don't favor or they don't really recommend. I think what has happened last time during the Nancy Pelosi visit, we haven't really seen administration or President Biden, saying anything or express a little different opinion, because even they are from the same party. So if now they are from a different party, if administration or executive branch can really say something, that would be encouraging. I noticed the White House spokesperson said, okay, they have no news, they don't really recommending, and probably, and so we'll see their how they can handle this. But I agree with you, we could have more US congressmen, senators, even McCarthy to visit mainland, to really see the real China, and how well developed, how well connected, how clean now the Beijing sky are, and all those good things, rather than have a serious stereotype and old image that they had in the past. So I really congratulate on your effort when you were here, leading all those congressmen, senators visiting around China, and we can resume that. We can really welcome more U.S. senators and congressmen come to China and visit, and then so that let's not just focus on Taiwan. I mean, that is the core issue, and that's really touched the nerves of the Chinese. And I hope that we can handle this with care and also consideration, and that really not to jeopardize. I really hope that Blinken can come before Kevin McCarthy. Absolutely, like, as you said, we set a chain of good exchanges between our two countries, followed by Yellen, and Yellen could come further, and the Secretary of Commerce, and Catherine Tai, USTR, and also Chinese senior officials visiting U.S. We haven't got a senior official visit since probably this new administration, but even during the last time Secretary Blinken, Secretary of U.S. State comes in 2018, it was already 3-4 years ago, or 5 years ago, whatever. We need more this kind of high level, so that, as you said, we can take this from a larger picture, rather than really U.S. is really focusing too much on Taiwan to gain politically. I know the system of U.S. Of course, the election years coming, they want to score political points, but let's also give the world, system, the global system, bilateral relation, and also long-term peace and priority in place to avoid this kind of a potential conflict as much as possible. But Don, you're the expert. You can give some more
just a couple of points. I would not count on the Biden administration taking a partisan position against Kevin McCarthy, doing one thing or another. That's not how we do things. It won't be beneficial to China's interests either, in my view, to make them even more partisan. The Biden administration did find ways to signal the limits on the Pelosi visit, and I have to say they have been more disciplined in adhering to the long-standing agreements between the mainland and the United States over how to handle Taiwan affairs since the Pelosi visit. My second suggestion would be that China, instead of sending your senior representative in Washington into McCarthy's office and warning him of the dire consequences of traveling to Taiwan, instead say, well, we have differences, you're going to do what you want to do, but we welcome you to Beijing as well. We extend you a formal invitation to come and meet with our National People's Congress leadership and our national leadership, and we can talk about all these issues directly rather than through the media. Take a different approach, a more constructive approach, and borrow from the example you cited, Gingrich going to the mainland and to Taiwan, a good example. I would also look back to the days of early normalization when Zhou Enlai used invitations to get people to come to China and to shape their views of what China was trying to do directly rather than trying to do it through the airwaves. This is a constructive suggestion, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I really think that now with KMT Vice Chairman visiting China and with more resume of the major links between Taiwan and the mainland, and we hope that we can generate a more cooperative atmosphere across the street. And also, China said probably many times they welcome anybody, from opposition or KMT, that if they are favored, a 92 consensus or whatever, they are all can be really we can discuss and we can really improve. And the mainland government said even in the future when the reunion happened, the Taiwan authority doesn't have to pay any federal tax on for that. And there's a lot of preferential agreement. There's probably more upgraded one country, two system probably. We hope to see that. But again, now between the U.S. and China, I think there's a lot of things on the thing that we can work together, and the economy and the global climate change and of course the business. So we hope that we can resume all those activities in the year of 2023.